So you mentioned that the LCS is still evolving. It is learning as it runs this experiment, this PMR, and all of the PMRs it's got going on in NPMR. It's learning, it's growing, it's changing. And there's a professor, Eric Cunningham, at the University of Washington, and you've done some videos with him. He had a sort of revelation about the schizophrenia between the God in the Old Testament, the angry God, the jealous God of the Old Testament, versus the loving, compassionate God in the New Testament. And he thought that your idea of an evolving consciousness system explained that. And I got the sense that you sort of agreed with that. And I just had a question about the timeline. So like, I'm wondering, does that mean that like any time before the year one, like for instance, like 800 BC, that the LCS was this angry, jealous system? Because that seems like not that it's long ago, but it doesn't seem that long ago. And it's a little unsettling of a thought to think of the LCS as this jealous thing just not even that long ago.
Yeah, no, that isn't very long. And the whole time that humanoids have been here on the planet, walking around, Homo sapien is a little less than 200,000 years in existence. So that's 200,000 years is a long time to be evolving. And Old Testament is probably what, 3,000 years maybe? Who knows? A lot of that is mythology that goes way back. But it's ancient. It's much of it was oral. Some of it was written down. A lot of it's been interpreted and rewritten down, like traditions go, so a lot of it has been changed. But if you look at indigenous people all over the planet, you'll find similar things. If you look at the Australian indigenous people, if you look at American Indians, if you look at old cultures, that go back millennia, 2-3 millennia or longer, you will find fearsome gods, scary gods, gods that punish, gods that get angry. Now, some of that is just people coming up with explanations for why things are bad. Okay, we've had really bad weather. We've had a drought. Why? Well, you don't have any good reason, but you need a reason because you don't like things being uncertain. You'd like to know why. Then you make something up and believe it. Oh, God's unhappy with us. So some of it is just that, people making something up and believing in it. And there's a strong dislike of uncertainty. People are kind of pushed to make up answers because they feel better when they have an answer. So beliefs tend to reflect the mindset and the quality of consciousness of the believer that creates them. So if you have a believer who creates a belief, then that belief will probably reflect the level of fear in that individual. So, somebody making up these fearful beliefs, that just kind of happens. So we've got that going on. That's one aspect of it. It's just natural human nature to make up stories and then believe them. And besides, there's power in beliefs, because if you claim that you understand reasons and, you talk to God and you know that God's angry, then suddenly you become an important person. Whereas if you're just one of the people that can't do any of that, then you're not so important. So that's another reason that it makes, there's benefits in claiming to be the connection to the source of the problem, that you can influence it. So we have a lot of that going on. At the same time, we have the larger consciousness system didn't just start out having a low quality of consciousness. It was just a piece of consciousness. It started out very simple. So it had to learn all the things that we've had to learn. And it was in the same position that we were, in the sense that in the beginning, it was just part of the big chat room. Okay, now the larger consciousness system includes all the individuated units of consciousness. They're not separate things. We're pieces of that system. Okay, so we are the larger consciousness system, but besides that, the system is more. Okay, we're parts of it, but as we evolve, it evolves. So we're a little piece of it. So if we take a little increment up and lower our entropy, then the whole system gets that increment up because we're part of the system. So the system's growth is somewhat tied to our growth, or I should better say that we are one of the strategies of the system for its own growth, is to take pieces of itself and have them interact in a virtual reality entropy reduction trainer, because that helps the whole system evolve. But it didn't get to that point where it realized and had the capability to actually make a virtual reality trainer. That took a very long time, from just a simple rudimentary consciousness to something that was capable of putting together an extremely complex rule set that would generate, so when the run button was hit, it would generate and evolve our universe. Okay. Big digital bang was when the run button was hit and the simulation was allowed to evolve, and it evolved into our universe. So our universe isn't programmed, it's evolved from a rule set and a set of initial conditions. So that took a very long time to get to the point where it could do something like that. It had to learn a whole lot of other things before it could ever get there. So that's what most of its time was doing, and most of, and it was doing that long before we haven't even had the humanoids walking around. That was many, many eons before humanoids ever got here. But the system itself wasn't really challenged like it was challenged after it created independent, free-willed, individuated units of consciousness. You see, at that point, its challenges started to grow dramatically. That's why it had an awful lot of time, where it was growing, but slowly. It was learning things. It was developing mathematics. It was developing all the computer science things, because that's just information system stuff. It was organization. It was ways that were meaningful, that it could do things. So it was developing its understanding, and the idea that we need a virtual reality with a tighter rule set that will create interactions that have consequences. Then that took a while to come up with that idea, and then a lot longer to build the infrastructure that could do it, and then a lot longer to find a rule set that actually was stable for a few billion years, so that it would be stable long enough to evolve something that was usable. And I'm sure there was a lot of that learning, just trial and error. So you can just imagine how difficult that process was and how long that took consciousness to get to this point. But it wasn't until it did that, until it got this evolution running, and it ran long enough that things like people evolved. Okay, we had maybe chimpanzees evolved before us. That's kind of our next primate back, is what the biologists say, our next closest relative that's still kicking around on the planet, chimpanzees. And it had that, but see, that is a much, much smaller decision space that chimpanzees have than humans have. When it got to humans, the decision space started to get very, very large, because there was so many things that they could do, so many ways that they could change and interact with each other. They started building and constructing and, creating societies and civilizations and building tall buildings and lots of things that they were developing and growing that the chimpanzees didn't go that way. They weren't able to do that, though they had hands and, you know, they could balance and they could walk around on 2 feet. They just weren't that as adaptable. They weren't as complex and adaptable as the humans. And the humans weren't always Homo sapiens. There was a half a dozen different hominids that were kind of our cousins, if you like. You know, Neanderthal was one of those, but there's others. Neanderthal wasn't the only other one. There was a bunch of those. And we basically outbred them and absorbed them. And now Homo sapiens just kind of taken over because we're really good at breeding. We optimized the breeding process, so, you know, we overwhelmed everybody else. We outbred them. Now, it wasn't until the humans got to the point that they were interactive in a big way that the system really got challenged. Because all of this was developing, and when the humans came, the system started out with this idea, okay, and the system may have helped that human evolve. They may have gotten to the point where chimpanzees just weren't enough, just weren't doing it. You know, there wasn't enough challenge there. It was too unchallenging. Who knows? The system could have reached down and, you know, how if you're the creator of the simulation, you've got the license to make changes and to do things. It may have done that and ended up with something that was more like what it needed to solve its problem. After all, this is a tool it's created. So at that point, it may have done something that suddenly made a bunch of creatures that had a lot more potential to make these choices that were meaningful. And it wasn't until that started, until humanity really started, that 200,000 years ago or so, that the system really got challenged. So those humans go out, and pretty soon they go from a chat room where they never really developed much love or caring for other because they were very self-centered in a little cocoon in a chat room, passing things around. Now they had the potential to evolve, to be cooperative, but how cooperative can when you're just a isolated thing that communicates? You know, and you don't do anything that really affects anybody else. Well, it can, but people can just turn you off. You know, if you're maybe nasty to them or nice to them, if they don't like you, they can just turn your channel off. It's like in the internet. If you don't like an internet site, just don't click on it. So there really wasn't much going on there that would force people to make decisions. So they hadn't evolved or de-evolved much at all, even though they'd been a long time working at it. Well, when they got to this virtual reality where the rule set created all of these life and death choices that they had, well, initially, they were supposed to go there, make these choices, and grow up, become love. And they didn't. They got there, and they started stealing each other's stuff and killing each other. And, oh, you got a nice cave, and I don't mind leaks. I got 100 people in my tribe, and you only got 50. Hey, we'll just take your cave. You know, we'll kill all the men and boys, keep the women to keep reproducing, so then we'll have 100 people. And we'll be bigger. So it got to be very violent. It got to be very rough. And the system is sitting there going, no, 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 that's not what we're doing here. Look, you guys are supposed to be growing up, making good choices and whatever. And the people have free will. So they just were what they were. And they hadn't evolved any, they had potential to go higher, potential to go lower. That potential had never been developed either way. It was just sitting there. They suddenly got to this virtual reality that was not just a light touch, caused, you know, 20 or 30% more challenges. It was like, you know, a totally different world that went from casual chit chat to life and death. Eat or be eaten, kill or get killed. And basically, they made a lot of really poor choices. And the system tried to first educate them, teach them. That didn't seem to work very well, never does. You can explain things intellectually to people, but people are just going to be the way they are. And
I guess, how would it do that? Would it send like divine beings? How would it
it might just communicate telepathically.
intuitively, maybe like in their
Maybe
intuition?
intuitively, whatever. It could have had spokesmen that it would send there to tell them things that could have done any of those things. It's in control. You know, it could play the character. It itself could take a character. And now that character would be, indeed, the LCS is playing that character. And this character may wave its arms and say, "Yea, verily, I say unto you, you need to do this and that," and he'd have to speak in a vernacular and in metaphors that those people understood. Their understanding of abstract concepts wasn't too good. They were very big on very concrete concepts like, I need something to eat.
Yes.
I need a place to stay. They were very concrete focused, not focused on the other world, that this and that and low entropy and being kind to others was very esoteric to them. To them was survival was what was key, staying alive. And they very quickly devolved into that warlord, kind of characteristics. So the system tried docking, it tried bullying, it tried threatening, it tried all of those things to get them to do better. And what it learned was every time it did that, it made everything worse. It didn't make things better. It made things worse. You see? So it eventually realized that you have to let these individuated units of consciousness grow up on their own, in their own way, in their own time. The only thing you can do is give them an environment that is conducive to their growing up. Well, they had the virtual reality. It was extremely challenging. And it realized that, yeah, it could give them an Eden that wasn't so challenging, but that didn't work. Because if you have an Eden where everything is there, you just eat the fruit that hangs off the trees and life is good, it doesn't work because they had all this undeveloped potential. And it was just as easy for somebody to say, you see all these fruit trees? They're mine. Me and my guys, we own all these fruit trees, and you guys go someplace else. So until those people grew up, you couldn't really do anything for them to help them grow up more. If you made it easier, they just take advantage of it. And the only way to grow up is one choice at a time. And they weren't at a point that those choices were positive. Negative is easy. Positive is a lot more hard. You see, anytime you get to a choice, let's say you've got some choice, some major choice in your life, should I marry Susie or should I marry Jane? That's a choice. It's going to make a lot of difference in your life. It's going to change your life. You got some kind of choice like that. Well, how are you going to make that? You just do the best you can. You wing it because you don't have any information. Well, that's the way these people were. They were winging it. And when you wing it, you just do what you feel. And if survival is the only thing pushing your buttons, you don't do all that well. You start making a lot of bad choices because it's all about you. It's all self-centered. What's going to be best for me? How am I going to get the most out of this? Is she going to meet all my needs and do all the things that I need? You've got this vision of the way you need her to be. See, well, that's not love. That's need. It's different. It's all about you. You decide to go with this woman because of the way you think she will give you the stuff that you need. See, it's all need-based rather than love-based. So anyway, the system realized that there just wasn't anything it could do to help. That it just had to work behind the scenes in the margins. Anytime it got out where it was obvious, burning bushes and stuff that was obvious didn't work. Made stuff worse. Edens made stuff worse. It just had to let them alone and grow up. Well, we ended up in a warlord mentality because that's how things start. When you have a lot of potential, but you've never experienced it, and you end up in a very hard, severe place. That's the way it is. Well, why was this a hard, severe place? Because that's just what our rule set evolved. It had a rule set, and after that, nature just took place. It was a hard place because that's how evolution works. The ones that survive are the ones that are better at, staying alive, which means they're tougher, meaner, and scrappier. They're the ones that have evolved to be resilient and to adapt. Those are the ones that survive. So it ended up a place that survival was not simple. You had a lot of competition. You might kill the tiger might kill you. Just the nature of evolution. It builds systems based on survivability and procreation. That's competition. That competition produces a pretty harsh environment. But if you don't have that, then your system doesn't become stable, because our ecology, our biology, our planet Earth is all balanced. It's all balanced systems. It's important that these eat those, because otherwise those would grow, and there'd be so many of them that they'd overrun things. So they have to have all these balances that grew up by evolution to make the whole thing stable and work. And a tough place to make a living. So yes, we have this idea that up until about the time humans were around, or up until after the humans were around, there really wasn't much interaction between the system and what was evolving there. But once we got to the humans, where they really started to make these meaningful moral choices, and they were making hundreds of them every day, then the system tried to bully, tried to sweet talk, tried to do anything it could do to get them to make better choices, always made it worse. Mm-hmm. Eventually the system let it go. So that's the difference between the Old Testament, where you have a mean and angry and jealous God, and the New Testament, where it's just all about love and caring and being considerate of other people, because that's what the system learned. So it grew up and started to learn how to make better choices based on us. We were the big challenge. Now with us, we're each other's challenge. We have to deal with other people. And our life and their life and the whole thing will get better as we start, if we deal less out of fear and more out of cooperation, caring, and love. And that's the name of the game. And we just have to work that out and come to that conclusion. So that idea is what kind of supports the Old Testament, the New Testament. It goes from, the jealous and angry God and my people, and the people who don't do what I say, they're the enemy, and heavy-handed kind of interference. And the system had to learn it. This is evolution. You can't just skip a bunch of steps and have some big monolithic consciousness create parts of itself, and suddenly it's the benign, loving master of all. It doesn't work like that. It's got to grow up just like anything else. It had potential, and it needed to figure out what to do with that potential. And it made mistakes as well, and all that anger and jealousy. And listen, folks, listen to me. You must obey me. I'm telling you what you have to do. Oh, jealous, angry God. Okay. So anyhow.
Yeah, that is so interesting. That is a very interesting perspective. And it's interesting to think of how history, it's probably really tough to understand very ancient history, because not only are the human situations different, but the LCS was different back then too.
Yes, very different. So then we're saying the LCS really just grew up as we got on the scene. It started to grow up. So it's only been 3, 4, 5, 10, I don't know, 20,000 years. How long, do we have that going on? Maybe 30,000 years. I don't know, but 40, 50,000 years, but not probably much more than that. So the first 100,000 years or so, there may not have been much going on, or the system may have thrown up its hands and who knows what went on, but our written records only go back for probably 10, 20, 30,000 years of mouth, from hand to mouth, it's not hand to mouth to mouth, telling of tales and things. So, yeah. So see, that's another point. So here you have something that is a quandary. Why do we have this Old Testament that's got the angry, jealous God, and in the New Testament, it's all about love? Well, partially it's just people making up beliefs about something angry because it gives them status if they're the one that talks to the angry spirit, or because it's obviously angry because it hasn't rained for 2 months, so it must be angry with us. So it just, people don't like not knowing, so they make up stories and believe them. Some of it's that, but it also is more than that. It's also that, yes, some of those stories talk about this God that did all these things, and those are very ancient texts that go back many thousands of years. So it's nice to have a theory that when you look at it, says, oh, that makes sense. System had to grow up. System wasn't really challenged very much for that first 100,000 years or so, 150,000 years. Wasn't a whole lot going on there. Choices weren't that much until the humans evolved, and there got enough of them that the interaction got to be pretty belligerent. Then suddenly there was a lot of decision space, and then is when the system would have started to butt in, try to manipulate it, to be more, to grow up faster. But you can't grow up fast. That's why I tell people, don't believe what I say, because you're not going to grow up just with an intellectual understanding of the my big toe theory. You can understand it and be great at cocktail chatter and can answer everybody's question, but if you don't live it, if you don't be it, it won't help you evolve. And if it doesn't help you evolve, then it's not useful.
And since we live in this fractal reality, I mean, the way that the LCS had to learn to deal with the people, it sort of mirrors the way parents have to learn to parent their children, in a sense.
Exactly.
That you can't control. You can't be too overt in your approach.
Yes. See, this is a fractal reality, but not a geometric fractal. It's a process fractal. A process fractal is something like evolution. It's a process where it produces an output, and that output is fed back in as the input. It's always changing itself. That produces a process fractal. So it's just a modification. It's an iterative self-modification. So you have these processes of evolution, processes of growing up, becoming love, and you just see them just repeat everywhere. These little processes, you can see them at the big scale, and you can see them between, yes, parents and children. It's the same process that you're trying to, whether it's the LCS trying to get, humanity to make better choices, or whether it's a parent trying to get a child to make better choices. It all works the same way. And if you try to manipulate, you try to bully, you try to demand, it doesn't work. It helps raise neurotic children who then go on to bully and demand their own, of their own children. Mm-hmm. It's dysfunctional. You have to let them make their own choice. You have to give them guidance. Now, the system can interact with the people, but it has to do it without notice. It has to do it in the margins. It has to do it in a way that it isn't pushy. It has to be invisible. So yes, that system can do things to help us grow up. And we call that, what do we call that? Synchronicities. Mm. You walk through the library and suddenly it's almost like a book grabs your attention, jumps off the shelf into your lap, and you're just drawn to, what is that red cover down there? And for some reason, you just want to go down and see what it is. Mm-hmm. No particular logic in that. And you go down and you see it. Oh, wow. and it's just what you need. These are called synchronicities, where something just kind of off the wall that isn't too likely to happen randomly, just is there just when you need it at a time. Well, the system can do that sort of thing because it still wants to help us make good choices, because as we evolve, it evolves. But it can't do it in any way that looks purposeful, heavy-handed, interfering. It cannot interfere with your free will. So it may focus your attention on a book and give you a nudge that says, you go down and see what that's all about. But it can't actually make you make the choice, take that book home and read it. That's your choice. It can put it in front of you. You know, it can lead the horse to the water, but it can't make him drink. It can't get in front of the free will of the people, which is what it was trying to do before, telling them what to do, overriding their free will, letting them be who they are. So the system does help. It does interact, but only in a way that makes it invisible without ever getting in front of our free will. So free will becomes sacred, if you will. If there's anything sacred in this, it's free will. You can put something in front of them, but you can't make them make a good choice. You have to let them choose. You can't push them, and you can't make it such that they have no other choice. You've led them just into one choice. You know, that's manipulation. That's overriding free will. So the system is very scrupulous about never overriding our own free will. All choices have to be ours. Whenever you override somebody else's free will, you're part of the problem. Not true if the person's only 3 years old. Then you have to override their free will because it's not safe for them to play in the street, and they don't understand that. So there's a point where you make decisions for people, but those are people who are very young. And as they grow up and become more capable of making choices, you have to let them make choices, even if you don't like the choices. But if you and they have a good relationship, then you can discuss the things, not get polarized into the parents just don't understand, you know, and the children just don't understand. And you got this polarized thing, and now there's no communications. Communications are gone because the parents were heavy-handed and said, no, you cannot do that. That's dangerous. You will not go to that party. You will not have this guy as your friend. He's a bad apple. So when it's done by edict, it's not a good way. Again, every time you force, that carries a negativity with it. You may force behavior, but if they're not doing it because they know that that's really a better choice, they're not learning anything. But if the parent and the child trust and have respect for each other, they'll listen. Even if they have to pretend not to listen, they'll listen anyway. And the parent may get frustrated because it looks like they're not listening, but they're listening and they're processing. And they will get it because they respect you and they trust you. Nobody respects and trusts the bully that tries to tell them what to do. They discount them. Matter of fact, they have to do just the opposite in order to maintain their own sense of self, that they're not just a puppet being manipulated. So, yes, and the system had to learn the same thing. As people are capable of making choices, you have to let them make the choices, but you can give them guidance. You can make just the right book pop out of the shelf where they can find it. You know, you can do those kinds of things. But
right.
you can't do it.
A gentle nudge,
A gentle nudge, and being there for them and not judging them. You see, if you judge them, then they don't like that. What that tells them when you judge them and find them lacking and find like they need to do things differently, you're telling them you're not good enough. Well, you keep telling somebody that they're not good enough, they'll believe it. And then by the time they're adults, they are insecure. They have an innate sense of not being good enough and of being failed. It's not something to give a child, you know, the rest of their life is a sense of failure and not being good enough. So instead, you need to develop a respect for them, their own ideas, and let them make some mistakes that they learn from. And let them make them early, because the consequences of mistakes 5 and 6 and 10 years old are small. Consequences of making mistakes when you're 17, 18, and 19 are pretty big.
Yeah.
So you let them make those choices. Let them understand that your advice is something that's good. And if they can get advice from you, they'll want advice from you because they need it. But if you bully them all their life, that you don't have that relationship. You demand that they be the way you want them to be. When it comes time when it's really serious and they need to get your advice, they're not listening. And if they are listening, they'll do the opposite thing. So yes, it's the same problem. If you are a fearful person, you tend to lead with power, control, and force. If you're not a fearful person, if you're a loving person, you tend to lead with caring and respect and compassion. One of them will build respect. The other one will build fear and what? Resentment. So see, that's how we take our fear and we pass it on to our children. They grow up to do the same thing that we did to them. So yeah, that's how you raise children. You know, you raise them with being positive, caring, teach them respect. Then they find you as a parent to be a valuable resource, somebody they can rely on, not somebody that tells them how to be and what to do and what to think. For your own good, of course, because they just will resent that. Even if you're right, doesn't matter. It wasn't their choice. You are taking over their free will, which is okay up to a point, but once they start hitting the teenage years, taking over their free will is not appreciated because it keeps them from growing up successfully. So anyway, that's the way it is. So the more fearful we are, the more we are into dominance, control, and force. And yeah, it just, see, here you go. I said we have a theory that basically has its tentacles down into everything. Yeah. So here's the problem of New Testament versus Old Testament. Wow, what a big break. Well, there's an answer, a logical answer. So in theology, in psychology, in sociology, in mathematics, in physics, all of these fields are changed by this idea. And logical answers show up, not answers that start with assumptions, but just take the theory and see the logic and it makes sense. So that's what's good about it.
Yeah, that's definitely the spooky thing about MBT is it really does make sense of so much. It makes sense of a lot of different things.
Yeah, and it's simple. It's really got just a couple of ideas. You know, you could kind of write the ideas out in a short little sketch and see, you know, what the basic logic is. But I mean, the fundamental idea is consciousness is fundamental. That's one of the big ideas, and that's a logical derivation from where we start.
Yeah,
consciousness exists, and that the physical reality is a virtual reality, and it squares with science. Double slit experiment has shown us that the physical reality is not fundamental. Mm-hmm. I mean, we got experiment after experiment that says that's true. But what we do, instead of saying, "Oh, that's telling us that physical reality is not fundamental," but then they say, "Well, yeah, but that doesn't make any sense. So we'll just say that's weird science. Of course, it's fundamental. Physical reality is, but it has this weird science." You see, we avoid it. We deny it. We go on because that's too big a step for us to take. Completely tears the rug, out from under us conceptually. So that's why I say materialism is the fundamental reality here in most of the people, It's the fundamental way people see reality. And to see reality is that consciousness is fundamental, and this is a virtual reality. That's a huge philosophical step for most people to see that. Many will nod their head and say, yeah, that could be a possibility, but for them, it's just some esoteric thought that's out in space. It doesn't really mean anything. You know, it doesn't really affect real life. But that's not true.
Right.
It affects every phase of your real life when you look at the logical implications.
Yeah, as soon as you put consciousness as the foundation of the reality instead of particles, then everything clicks. So much
Everything
clicks.
is understandable, and I keep looking for things that conflict with it. You know, I keep looking. I'm open to find things, and it's just a model. You know, it's not this is the only model. Models have to be open-ended. There may be things facts that contradict with this. In case, then the model has to change. You know, if we find out things that MBT disagrees with, but those things are facts, then MBT is wrong, and it has to be modified. And if it can't be modified, it needs to be thrown away. So it's just a model of the nature of reality. So far, it seems to be successful, and it explains so many things in so many areas. But I wouldn't say that it will always explain everything, and that it is the model and the right answer. It's just a model. Models are only as good as how well they produce answers to things. So I'm always open to ideas that conflict, that aren't there. And I've been given some as the years have gone by, and I look at them and I say, yeah, my model really doesn't explain that very well. And I have always been able to come up with a very straightforward, logical explanation eventually.
Yeah.
So far, but who knows? I'm open to adjusting the model when it, if it fails to do something. I don't have a belief in it. It's just my best shot at the nature of reality based on my own experience. And I don't want people to believe it or disbelieve it. I just put it out there as a tool for people to use to develop their own theories. Because if everybody's out there working on this, they will all eventually, come to a conclusion that's best for them. So as long as everybody's working on the problem, I don't worry about where it is they'll end up. All paths seem to end up at the same place. I'm on the same path Buddha was on.
Yep.
Same path that most of the people who have been big thinkers are on.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's basically all of the major questions that I have for you today. And yeah, some of those answers were just fascinating, especially that Old Testament thing. I mean, I don't normally think about the Bible that much, but putting it in that perspective, it's definitely a whole new look at history. Thinking of the LCS as a different being, a less evolved being as it is today. It's just super fascinating.
Yeah, it was evolved enough to create the technology to allow the virtual reality long before, but it still, was pretty much alone, pretty much a monolithic thinker, if you will, alone with itself. It wasn't until human types came along, till Homo sapiens came along, dominated, and had such large decision spaces that they really had the potential to evolve and make a difference. They really could raise or lower the quality of consciousness of the whole system.
Yeah.
It just didn't do it right.
Right.
And here's another one, looking at history. Many indigenous people, again, I say that, I just mean old cultures that go back millennia. Many of them have this idea of the original beings. Hopis, I think, believe that we came from the stars. We were out there somewhere and we came here. And when we were there, life was good. Everything was fine. There wasn't a whole lot of turmoil. And after we got here, it's been awful. It's been a struggle. There's been wars and violence, and it's not been good since then. And we have kind of the Garden of Eden, and everything was good, and then they became aware and had to interact with that awareness, with awareness of what was going on and why. They had with the apple of knowledge. Suddenly that knowledge of being here and interacting, and that ruined everything. And you have many of those. They found them almost uniformly spread all over the planet in all kinds of cultures, that everything used to be really nice and good. Sometimes it's tied up with Atlantis, and everything was well, and then some kind of terrible thing happened.
Mm-hmm.
Here we are. And what that is a bunch of deep memory, if you will, because there is a thing called, collective consciousness. That's this deep memory of the IUOCs being leaving the chat room and logging on to the virtual reality. That place that was so easy and not fraught with difficulty and challenge and death and disease and fighting and so on, that was the chat room. And then they were encouraged very strongly to go log on to this game. And many of them did. And suddenly life was hard here on this planet Earth and terrible. So you have this cosmology that is common through almost all the old cultures that starts like that. And that, to me, is because we've had that common experience. If you go back in our collective memory, that we came from a place where there wasn't any violence, where there wasn't any starvation, where there wasn't any disease. And finally we got here, and it's been hell ever since.
Well, that could very well be true, for sure.
So no, that's just an idea. I'm not saying any of these things are true and facts. These are just ideas where I see a connection. That's probably why these stories arise so many different places in so many different cultures. There has, when that many things show up from that many separate places, it makes you think there must be something behind it.
Yeah.
And that would be a very good explanation of what's behind it. Those are some of our first collective memories of logging on, which would be as far back as 200,000 years ago. But probably at that point, it wasn't enough to really be collective memory. It was probably more like maybe 50 or 100,000 years ago, when there was enough people around that the fighting with each other and so on got more and more intense. So that's another explanation. I wouldn't say that's a great explanation, but it's plausible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned how that can get wrapped up in the Atlantis story, but sometimes I used to read Graham Hancock's book. Robert Schoch, he's a geologist at the Boston, I think it's Boston University. And their work is they show, like for instance, the Sphinx in Egypt supposedly has water weathering on it, according to Robert Schoch. He's a geologist, and I guess you don't get heavy rainfall in the Sahara until you go back further back in history than it's supposedly built. So I guess what they posit is that there was an actual human civilization that could have been Atlantis, not really the IUOC chat room. I don't know if that's true. And I don't know if you've done any exploration in the database about that.
No, I haven't. But there are things that are mysterious that just happen. It's hard to explain. The system tends to do things sometimes that are. I said that it has to do it in the margins. Well, sometimes it does things just to help wake us up, to help us see the world as more than just a physical reality, to get us out of the materialist rut, to show us a world that's bigger and more vibrant and has more dimensionality than just the physical. And it will do things. Part of those things it does is gives people paranormal experiences, because it kind of wakes them up to a bigger reality. But there's other things too that are done in a larger scale, like crop circles. Mm-hmm. Crop circles just appear, and they sometimes cover 10, 20 acres, and they mostly appear overnight. and they have very complex patterns to them. Very complex patterns, often mathematical patterns. And they happen in the dark. And they're silent. Well, that's really hard to explain. You know, if you gave people the plans and gave them the mathematical equations and you hired, 100 surveyors to go out and lay all that out, it'd probably take them a month or two just to survey all those curves and shapes and things. Would be very hard to do. It's not like they're just straight lines. There's lots of curvy lines and whatever. To lay all that out over 15 acres and have a precise, mathematical relationship to each other. So many people come to the conclusion that they have no explanation. And of course, when we make something up because we don't understand it, we often will say, well, must be aliens doing that. Aliens are kind of the new big force out there. Right. Aliens are popular now. So when it's something we don't understand, it used to be God did it, and now it's aliens do it. It's just another way of us to, it's another basket we can throw the unknown into, the alien basket or the God basket. But the system, the LCS, will often do things like that just to show us that reality is more than just the physical, because there's no physical way that can happen. So how does it happen? It has to be something, it's beyond people to lay that out in the dark silently overnight. And the idea that, oh yeah, it must have been a bunch of college students doing that on a lark. Well, that's obviously somebody who's in denial. They've never been there. They've never seen it. They've never talked to the scientists who were there. That's silly. It's the students or the farmers go out at night and do that. It's a silly thing. It's obviously way too complex to do in the dark, even if you were a very smart farmer with crop bending machines that were silent and didn't make any noise. So anyhow, the system does things like that sometimes. So you always have to be skeptical. Sphinx, pyramids, maybe they were just put there just to show the people at that time that life sure is strange and things happen that let us know that there's some, that reality is a lot more strange than what we think it is. It's not just the physical reality. So who knows? Now, I'm not saying that that's how those things got there. I'm not coming to any conclusions at all. I'm just saying that skepticism is a good idea. And the fact that something may just be put there with no particular physical causality should not be left off the list of possibilities. So yes, be skeptical. I don't, people sometimes think that I'm saying that that's what I think happened. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying it's one of the possibilities.
Right. Yeah, it's one of the possibilities. And another possibility that you talk about that I think is interesting, and I don't know if it's true, but the fact that, all the stars and the planets out there, they might just be, they might not really be inhabited. It might just be something that's rendered to you. We don't know. There could be aliens out there, but it might not be.
Matter of fact, there's some good logic to say that that is the case. But again, we don't know. It's just a possibility, another possibility. And that is what's called the Fermi paradox. And the Fermi paradox basically comes up with the question, where are they? And Fermi and his physicist friends, Fermi was a very top-end scientist in, I think, University of Chicago. So he and his friends decided to calculate how long it would take people from the older part of the universe to get here. So he made some assumptions that if people in the older part of the universe evolved sort of the way we did, but they started evolving 1 billion years earlier because we're 1 billion years younger than the old part of the universe, then they'd be 1 billion years of evolution ahead of us. And given the rate that we fill up spaces, how we procreate, we fill up the space and then there's nothing left to eat. So we have to move on and find bigger spaces and so on. And technology eventually would allow them to move on to the inhabitable places off their own planet, because they'd have eventually the technology to do that, and eventually the population where they'd have to do that, given that they would have very sub-light speed vehicles, because speed of light is something you can't go against. That's a big assumption to say you're going to have warp speeds and go faster than the speed of light. So they only had maybe 1/10 of the speed of light, which is something that would seem practical. Well, when he did that, his conclusion was that even with conservative assumptions, like how long would it be before they get technology, how long would it be before they needed to expand because of population and resources were running out, et cetera, the conclusion came, they should have been through here a long, long time ago. And every single thing that could be inhabited by somebody with a really advanced technology, which would include the Mars and our moon and our planet, everything would have been inhabited by these advanced technology society, and it would have been inhabited here long time back. We'd be, probably back before we humans even were here on the earth 200,000 years ago. They've been a long past here in this place. Anyway, where are they was the question. That's Fermi's question. Well, where are they? Well, the moon should be covered. Mars should be covered with things. We ought to look at a telescope and have the same kind of view that if we'd look back from there at the Earth, we ought to be able to see tall buildings and structures and man-made things and all kinds of stuff. It would have been crowded. They would have moved on. They would have gotten so crowded that they had to go past here. They'd be in other galaxies past ours by now. So where are they? They have to have the same kind of resources we have, because it's all the same physical universe, same rule set. So they kind of have a periodic table that looks like ours, because that's what the universe seems to be made of. They're going to have, electromagnetics like we do. Now, they may have other things that we don't have, but at least they will have those things that we've discovered will be available to them. And there's no way that you can do things that make you invisible. So that's, it'd be like, it's like being alone in New York City, and you've walked around the streets now for weeks or months, and you have never seen a single person, and somebody says, yeah, well, there's actually 20 million of us here. We're just sneaky, and you can't find us. It's like, nah, that's illogical. Can't do that. If there's that many around here, I can't be walking around here for months or years and not get any sign of anybody ever being alive. It just is impossible. So that's where Fermi's paradox is called a very strong logical paradox. Mm-hmm. And if you look up that paradox, and you'll get it in Wikipedia, you'll see there's a whole bunch of attempts to answer it, to give a logical solution to that paradox. And none of them are really nearly as strong. The solutions are not nearly as strong as the paradox is, so they're not considered that they really solve the paradox. But the one that solves it it's another problem. Somebody asked me, well, what about the alien thing or whatever? And I got to the Fermi paradox, and I looked it up, and I said, well, how would MBT explain that? And then it was obvious in a few days how they would explain that. The reason that science thinks there must be other life in this universe is because there's so many trillions of suns, and certainly billions of those will have planets around them, and some of those will be very much like our solar system. I mean, it's not like our solar system is terribly unique. It's just pieces of mass that got captured in gravitational pulls, and that has to have happened literally hundreds of millions, billions of times. So the probability that something evolved in the rest of the universe, like it evolved here, and we're not the singular thing that happened in the whole universe, that's astronomical. Of course, there must be other life. There has to be. We can't be unique in a universe of trillions of stars and planets, and this little one sun and planet is the only unique thing. That's illogical. So they come to the conclusion, of course, there should be people on other star systems, other galaxies, other places that or like us, or in the old part of the universe, much more advanced than us, or in the newer part, less advanced than us. So that's the idea. And then where are they becomes the paradox. So if this is a virtual reality, the paradox is answered, and it's answered strongly. And that is, how many seats does the LS need in its simulator? You know,
Yep.
okay, this planet gives it 7.5 million seats, and the population continues to grow. When does the overhead in feeding a seat, a data stream, cost more than what's given back to the system by having another, another seat? So if all things, all systems, when you look at optimization, all look like this. There's a place where if you add more is better, more is better, more is better, more is better, and eventually more, not much better, more, about the same as far as profitability, what you get out the other end. And then it's like more, now it's a little worse, because the overhead in maintaining that extra more costs more than than the value you get from having that extra person. So the system, every IUOC here, every avatar gets a data stream. It's another data stream the system has to produce, and all the interactions that avatar has with all the others, and it's part of the data. So you add an avatar, there's overhead to the system to maintain that and to follow all the calculations and all the things and all the choices and all the interactions and how all those interactions play out. So when does the system say, got enough avatars there, don't really need any more. I've got enough simulations going, because I know there are other simulations that are also physical, quote unquote, universes like ours that are not here. So it's got more of those. So it's got an awful lot of players already. And when is enough enough? Well, let's say in our case, 7.5 billion is all it needs here, because it's got other universes besides ours that are ongoing. We're not the only, the only egg in that basket. System wouldn't be that foolish. You don't put all your, all your evolution plans all in one thing. You're going to have multiple things going on, because some of them may fail. Like we may just bomb ourselves back into the Stone Age, and oh, well, there goes that. You're going to have to start evolution back over again. Maybe another, couple of million years before it recovers. So you don't want to put all the eggs in one basket. So anyway, if that's the case, and this is a simulation, it takes almost no overhead whatsoever to simulate a spot of light in the sky. It takes three bytes. It takes location, well, that's X, Y, and Z, and it takes brightness. That's about it. And it only has to render those to people at night when they're awake and looking at the sky, and it's not cloudy. So the number of renderings it has to render of those stars in the sky aren't that much. So the whole stars in the sky thing could be a trivial rendering, probably takes up less computer space, and just running one human, one human avatar probably takes up more space than putting all the stars in the sky. So a telescope, the Hubble, looks, sees things, it just computes. What's that likely to be? It shows them that picture. Done. Hubble gets turned off or points someplace else. That doesn't have to be rendered anymore. Things are only rendered as somebody looks at them. That's the efficient way to run a simulation, just like No Man's Sky does the same thing in a virtual reality game. You render on the fly. That's so much more efficient. And this system's had billions and trillions of years to get efficient. So that's the way it would work. So only things get rendered when somebody looks. So all that stuff, whenever we look at it, it renders at something. And if you go back and look at the same space, it'll render what it showed you the last time. It will still be there. So it's got constraints. It has to keep, be within the rule set and be consistent with history and other constraints on it, what it can render. But that's all. When you look away from that, none of that has to be rendered. So basically it's rendering a whole bunch of lights in the sky, and we're it. There isn't anything else here. This whole universe evolved just because it was part of what comes out of this equation. But the only part of interest would be the 7.5 billion of us. We're the only ones with free will to do anything. All the rest of it's just lights in the sky. So it's not a waste of resources. It's only expending the resources that give a return, no more. So if you have a virtual reality viewpoint, then the Fermi paradox has a hard logical solution. So that would be the solution, is that our reality is a virtual reality. And all those lights in the sky and all those trillions of suns and planets are unnecessary. System doesn't need that many seats. Doesn't need another billion Earths with another 7.5 billion people in each one of them. It's just too much.
Yeah, I remember being a little depressed when I first heard you talk about that theory, because it's just really cool to think about the whole universe being filled and all these distant galaxies. But then, I said, this is probably my ego that's feeling bad about this. And I reminded myself that there's the whole NPMR that is like a whole nother universe that's out there in consciousness space, right?
Yes. So it is an odd idea. And I just say again that this is just a possibility.
Yep.
It's not that this is what I believe. I try to believe nothing. I stay skeptical of everything, but it is an idea. It's a possibility. And it does have the advantage of other possibilities, is that it's the most logical because of the Fermi paradox. The Fermi paradox is asking for a logical solution to explain where are they? And that answers the question. They aren't. It's just us. And no, that's not irrational, because it's a virtual reality. And the virtual reality only has to contain, the number it needs. And any more than that is not useful. So all of that is it's a very hard answer, a very strong answer to the Fermi paradox. So it's got that going for it, but I believe nothing. Everything in my world is just probability. So I give that a 70%, 80% probability, because it is the most logical answer to the Fermi paradox. But I would never say, oh, that's the truth. That's the way it is. When you get to that point, that's back to dogma. That's back to belief. That's
right.
To be avoided. You don't go there. And when I first thought of the idea, I was more like 50-50. Well, that's a possibility, but the more I think about it, the more logical it sounds. So I've raised it up maybe 75, 80%. But if somebody comes up with something that kind of says differently, well, I'd be glad to hop on somebody else's idea. So I don't take pride in authorship of any of this. It's just stay skeptical and look at all the possibilities. Stay open-minded and juggle all these possibilities in your mind, and don't feel like you turn any of them into beliefs.